Welcome to the Open Loop podcast. It's a podcast exploring the people, companies, and ideas shaping the future of neurotechnology. I'm Chay Carter, the founder of Carter Sciences, Recce Neuro, and the Neurotech newsletter. In each episode, I sit down with founders, operators, researchers, investors, and leaders building the edge of neuroscience, neurotechnology, and healthcare. We'll have honest conversations about people's journeys into the neurotech industry, what they're currently building, how it's going, the realities, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and what the future holds for the neurotech industry in general.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm here today with Jennifer Ernst, the founder, former CEO of Tivic Health. I'll let you introduce yourself first, though, Jennifer. Why don't you give us a round of who you are and what you've been up to?
Well, as you said, I was founder of Tivik Health. Started the company about 10 years ago. Took it through some changes through a fairly major pivot last year, and handed the reins over to a new CEO just actually now about 6 weeks ago while we're doing this. So at the moment, I am taking a much needed rest break, but what I can't help but do is keep thinking about the industry and keep thinking about how we make it better.
Indeed, yeah. Well, look, we've had some great chats recently just about the journey through Tivic, and I think it's a fantastic story to tell. I'd love to start at the beginning, though, and what really got you into bioelectronics and neurotechnology as a whole.
Yeah, it started in a funny place. It actually started with a conversation with a former landlord. So she was really well connected to the startup community. And before Tivik, I had spent some amount of time at Xerox PARC. I was doing business development there, marketing and sales, at a point in time when PARC was building its own independent business. So that gave me a really nice exposure to a broad set of technologies. Also gave me kind of early exposure to what became our AI revolution going on right now. So that was really the starting point. I went into one of my client companies. We built that to about a $500 million market cap. It was a public market turnaround situation. And then after that was a Norwegian-based company. After coming out of that one, I said, I'm really interested in the startup landscape. So I connected to an old landlord, series of stories that lead to me connecting to the inventor of a really cool device that was providing a great deal of relief for sinus pain, sinus congestion. It came out of a collaboration he had with a doctor. The doctor had passed away. His wife wanted him to bring it to market. And over time, we just kind of had to look at each other and say, look, you've had 30 years in biomedical engineering. I know how to build companies. The sinus market is huge. It's a kind of irresponsible for us not to at least give it a try. So I had this invention, and then I had to figure out why it was working. And that's what really got me towards the bioelectronics. Was there was this new emerging field of how the electrical fields affect at the cellular level, really. I mean, at the time it was more sacral stim and back stim, deep brain stimulation, but there was really the emerging work that Kevin Tracy had been doing and moving towards more precise neuromodulation. And it fit so well with what we were seeing as the results that really took me into the neuroimmunology and bioelectronics area.
What was this device when you first saw it then? What did it look like? What was it doing?
It looked like a rectal thermometer for a cow. Quite honest. No, it was about this long. It was about this long. It was a box. It was black. Had a really sharp point on the end of it because you need very precise location of the treatment points. Eventually, I looked at it and said that this is not going to be a consumer product, but we eventually got this out of that. So
much less intrusive.
Much less intrusive. It fits in the pocket, and this is ClearUp. This is the product Tivik launched on. We got our FDA clearance. Clinical study started on January 1st, 2018, and we got our FDA clearance January 2nd, 2019. And then later that year, took it to market through Indiegogo and through, and then into the major markets.
So, tell us about the Indiegogo situation. This is quite an interesting one.
Yeah, I did share. You and I had chatted a little bit about this. Indiegogo at the time was a really strong platform for medical devices to launch on. Pre-approval, you could be taking pre-order. It's not technically pre-orders, but people would donate to the campaign, and then you could send them some configuration of the product with other benefits with it that allowed you to basically get a litmus test. And it was also one of the ways that funding sources were evaluating consumer outreach companies. Think was one of those. There were a couple at that time. So we got our campaign ready. It was about 3 months to get the campaign ready. You make a pretty major investment over time of getting all your assets together, getting in testimonials, getting doctors to back the campaign, getting people teed up so that you have first orders coming in fairly quickly. And then we submitted our campaign and it got rejected. What do you mean? You've been reviewing this all the way. They've been working with us. We're working hand in hand. Our liaison found out that 2 days before our campaign was scheduled to launch, 2 days, Indiegogo handed down the decision that they were no longer going to carry FDA-regulated products.
Ridiculous.
I was like, "You can't make it up. You can't make this stuff up." So we ended up scrambling. We negotiated. I tried to find anybody. This was one place where it was good to have a really large investor network. Um, Tried to find anybody connected to Indiegogo, anybody at the senior levels, trying to explain, like, this is a launch platform for medical products for this new wave of consumer technology. So we did finally get permission to launch the campaign. We were only allowed to run it for 1 month. So it was a critical month of getting pre-orders to prove the business case of the company.
And how did that go? What was the outcome of that?
I think we raised about 300,000 on it. So at the time, $1 million was considered a good launch. Getting 300,000 in 1 month meant every time I talked to investors, I had to explain why it was only 300,000, but it was at least a good signal, and gave us a really, a sign of confidence.
Yeah.
Probably more important out of that were the testimonials that started to come in. So that was where we also started getting our first customer comments, people saying, 4 and 5-star reviews, writing 200 words about how great the product was for them and helping them. So that was also a big piece of getting into a consumer launch.
What was the consumer marketplace like at the time? Because I mean, there's a lot of conversations these days about neurotech consumer stuff and like the spin-off from neurostimulation devices, or even BCIs now actually going in more into consumer non-invasive devices, and anything that has a EEG and a mobile app is really a consumer device. What was it like for you at the time?
I think that one of the things I learned in doing this is there's a huge difference. You have to think about this question. Are you creating a category? And creating a category is expensive. What share of wallet is your product going to command in the total customer solution set? It was another thing that when people are thinking, I'll just go consumer, I think sometimes I feel like the entrepreneurs feel that's an easier pathway. It's actually not. Because particularly if you do with FDA claims, so some of these wellness companies are just going out with a wellness product, ignoring the FDA piece altogether, limiting the claims they make, and then you just have to be sure that your customer-facing claims can be validated because you're regulated by the FTC in addition to the FDA. So there's one neurotech company, which will remain nameless, but that got a $4 million fine, not because of problems with the FDA, but because when they made the claims that had been approved at the FDA, by the FDA under their 510K, the FTC didn't think, the Federal Trade Commission didn't think they had strong enough supporting data.
Interesting, yeah. So it's not just a matter of you're bypassing the FDA and you can do what the hell you want, and but as long as you don't make any claims. I mean, I think there's often companies as well in the wearable market who are going down the consumer route to keep the lights on while they go through a clinical and regulatory process, because they can be very, very expensive as well. And it's not a bad option to keep that option open.
Well, something I've thought about, like when we talk about Oura and Whoop, for example, as having gone consumer, or Apple, and then beginning to get medical claims on the data that they're collecting, those products had predecessors that consumers already had a mental model about. Right? They already knew about fitness trackers. Step counters have been around for decades. These precursor, I won't call them predicates, but these products that came before set a consumer mental model. That was a big problem for us with ClearUp, because this was completely category defining. It wasn't as if there had been something they'd seen in their doctor's office that we then made a derivative product of, and they were already familiar with it. We had to create a whole new category, and that is expensive. That is an expensive proposition. So when people right now, when I hear, well, you keep the lights on by going consumer, maybe, but then you've got to be sure you're getting the really strong contribution margins, which means not just about what your cost of goods are, but also about what your customer acquisition cost is and your lifetime value. And if you don't have a recurring revenue stream, creating that lifetime value becomes very, very difficult, because the actual acquisition cost for customers is going to be easily $100+.
Mm. We're seeing more and more sort of prescription and subscription services
Right.
now in consumer brands, right, to make sure that the revenue is consistent and so forth. But a lot of it still is one and done capital sales, essentially, from a medical device perspective, which makes it incredibly difficult to scale.
Yes.
Becomes a big volume game then as well, I suppose.
Um, that's the other background in the Tivik story, is managing the supply chain crisis, because
Yeah.
we hit two defining moments. 2020, you may remember there was a worldwide crisis that happened in COVID.
Little pandemic that happened.
Little funding drought there. So in 2021, in order to keep the lights on, we took the company public. It afforded us some opportunities, and we did look at acquisitions. We tried to get some closed to build a bigger product portfolio. The capital markets then collapsed after that. But what also happened simultaneously as I was doing the public company launch was the supply chain crisis. So talking about scaling, entrepreneurs have asked me, what would you have done differently? And I have to candidly say, well, I wouldn't try to scale a consumer electronics product company in the middle of a global supply chain shortage.
Yeah, I mean, tell me about that commercial launch then, because I know that obviously you did the Indiegogo. Obviously, COVID was around the corner. What was that gap between what happened between Indiegogo and COVID?
So that year in between Indiegogo and COVID, we got online sales up and running. We did actually get a pilot scheduled into Best Buy. Most of our sales all through the course of the ClearUp lifespan were online sales, but we did get in-store launch with Best Buy. That went into store in March 2020. So if you think about retail channels, a personal learning I took away from it is really that each of the channels has their own kind of physics. They have their own. You think about how many stores, what's the turnover going to be? Are you going to be selling one every 1 or 2 a month? And products in a certain price point category. Target has a certain price point category that they can accommodate. Best Buy, under 200 use consumer health products at that time. That was kind of their cap. If anything was over 200, they didn't see it move on the shelves. So the initial product launch, we went out $129 on Indiegogo, $149 into Best Buy. Our consumer testing had said that we had a segment of our customers willing to pay up to $249 type range. Eventually, we did move there. We ended up moving the pricing up the ladder to actually create that contribution margin that I was talking about. But yeah, when we IPO'd, I had a negative 16% gross margin compared to 75% when we finally could get through that supply chain crisis.
Wow. I mean, how was the IPO process too? That must have been quite an intense one, right? I mean, how big were you at the time then from like a headcount perspective? Obviously, talk about the growth, but I mean, obviously
Yep.
lots of stuff going on for you to want to IPO.
It was 8 people.
Right. Wow.
8 people, and my CFO resigned before we got the process going. So, yeah, it was an intense year.
Yeah.
I mean, I was still trying very hard to raise capital privately and not necessarily have to take us onto the public market, but we had enough investors at that point. We had a backing from an investment banker, and we created a liquidity opportunity for our shareholders. So it was I think back and say, would you do it? People have asked me, would you do it again? There wasn't really another choice at that time, right? So I think a lot of the sequence of events that happens inside companies, when we go back and look back, we also have to ask ourselves, was it truly a choice, or did we really only have one pathway available?
Yeah, I mean, like you've been through a lot, right, as a founder of a business for a relatively short period of time, I suppose, but not really. I mean, it must have been quite the experience and felt like an eternity, right? Working through COVID, going through the Indiegogo situation, then IPOing.
Oh,
I mean, yeah, looking back at it now, I mean, would you have done that differently? What about the rest of it? I mean, what would the perfect scenario look like versus what you went through? Because you went through everything.
yeah. But no, the perfect scenario would look like. I'm not even sure we can say there's normal times, because now everybody's had to worry about tariffs recently, have to worry about whether they're going to have access to the supply chains that have been there for us for decades. So I think it's more about being adaptable and having backup plans. We had planned to launch with physicians as part of the overall plan. ENT offices were shut down for a year. Conferences were closed. So going online, the person who was my VP of operations at the time said, this is our survival was turning plastics into cash. It was a plastics to cash. We've got a lot. What we had at the time was over $1 million of inventory potential sales. So we had all the parts, we had plastics, we had the way to assemble them. and sell them online. And so that was the first part, is just really scrambling and saying, that part we're going to put on hold. That's not going to happen. ENT offices are closed. We're not going to have their attention for another year after they finally open. And then we've got the online opportunity, so let's get all the push behind it there.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like there's so much of what you went through was timing related, right? With the Indiegogo stuff and then COVID, and then obviously, like in this market with the current landscape of consumer devices, like how do you think the business would have done? And yeah, is there anything? I mean, you mentioned different issues, right? Manufacturing is a big concern at the moment too, as well as tariffs, as you mentioned. I mean, yeah,
I think the overall lessons, the overall takeaways, as I said, have backup plans, but also you've really got to look hard at that economic question of the return. If you're going to do consumer, subscriptions are now established. 10 years ago, I did consumer testing, and basically it was, oh my God, not another freaking app on my phone, was the response I got from about 85% of our test subjects. Today, that resistance isn't there. So subscriptions, using the device as an interface to manage. I think one thing I underestimated, and in this all macroeconomic context as well as the FDA context, I came out of a tech background, and we launch tech products routinely. You iterate quickly. I mean, you put out a version every 6 months. Software, you're putting out a version every week, right? I mean, you're updating constantly. With a regulated product, we didn't have as much flexibility to make the changes without going back and do another clinical study to validate that the changes don't change the outcome. Wireless version, well, now we're having to take that software through an FDA approval that, is this a wellness device, or what would people want to track? Their symptomology. Is that going to be a helpful support tool? And then realistically, how much does it cost to run on AWS and to build the app and to manage the infrastructure associated with that? I still believe that can be done. Now, where I think it translates in a curious way is subscriptions are not supported in the reimbursement pathways. So if you think about electroCore went out with a digital prescription model, which is basically a subscription, they struggled. I mean, they really, really struggled at the get-go, because it's almost like you're going to have a different product design in order to meet the reimbursement targets for a non-invasive device. And that includes having, for example, a replaceable component, having it re-prescribed every 6 months. You give a 6-month prescription, then it gets re-prescribed. Bioelectronic has a really interesting feature that I commented on my LinkedIn post recently. This question of, how do physicians get paid? So if I'm counting on an ENT to refer somebody for this, but it's going to knock out a surgical candidate, you're not going to get that refer. You're just not going to get them making that choice. How are they actually making money? And so in the prescription world, a lot of doctors make money being featured speakers. I mean, there's a whole, they're not allowed to get directly paid by the pharmaceuticals, but they can be part of continuing education and be a support structure. So there's a lot of ways that they build relationships with pharma companies. And I think the device companies, we have to learn from that about how we leverage that. But that's one thing with the implanted devices and the minimally invasive. And I think minimally invasive is probably going to be a category that becomes of some more interest in these as this unfolds. There's a procedure that a doctor is doing. Now, what I was starting to mention about Bioelectronic, you did the interview. It was your interview, I think.
Yeah, with Todd, yeah.
So there was a really pertinent point in there where he mentioned one of his experts had a room full of implanters, asked, "Do you know if the device is on or off?" And nobody raised their hand. That isn't about having anything super closed loop. That's not a this is not a super, it just, is it on?
Yeah.
That ability, the remote monitoring part, is something physicians can bill for.
Interesting.
I saw that Cala Health has that as part of their business model. When somebody gets a Cala Health subscription, there's some visits that are associated with basically making it work right, fitting it, adjusting parameters, but then there's also a continuous monitoring aspect to it. Do parameters need to be adjusted? And those are now billable services. Those did not exist 10 years ago when I started Tivik.
It's interesting. I think it's like, there's this constant conversation about closed loop technology and things like that. And obviously like responsive units that are analyzing what your body is doing and then giving something back in return. And then I think that works for some of the implantables, spinal cord stimulation devices, deep brain stimulation, even some wearable devices these days are closed loop. Again, requires zero monitoring. It just responds. Having said that, yeah, the remote patient monitoring piece is really the exciting stuff, I think, where, doctors, surgeons, physicians, clinicians can look at what was going on, and analyze it and react to it themselves. So it might not be closed loop. It might be more of an open loop device, but it's still, at least it's being monitored by
Yeah.
by a professional.
Well, and I suspect we're going to see that. I mean, ResMed is an interesting example because the doctor's office gets a ton of data off of the monitor, as a monitor, that the consumer who's using the CPAP machine can't see, can't get. There's a whole different stream of data that's going to the doctors than is coming to the consumer. And I don't remember where I saw it, but I think there are some nuances in here about the closed loop devices making their own decisions. And the FDA is rapidly having to figure out how do they regulate something that can change.
Yeah. I mean, it's part of a larger conversation as well, isn't it, around the communication of medical data to patients. And,
Right.
we're relying on doctors and physicians to tell us what they know and what they see and what they can translate for us. And I think obviously AI and ML algorithms now analyzing data and responding in a certain way, which is great. But I do think there's also this, like, back to the consumer conversation, certainly with the wearable BCI space of, brain monitoring and signal decoding and signal processing. That's all good. That's great. It's amazing. We're understanding more and more about how the brain functions under certain circumstances. But can we translate that into an understandable conversation with patients or just the general public? It doesn't have to be a patient. I think the reality is, I think I've said this to you before, and certainly in another articles, whoever cracks the Aura ring for the brain form factor and makes it subtle, discreet, and accurate and understandable will, do incredibly well, I think, in the electronics world. But that's kind of where we're at, I think, with that. Like, it's difficult to translate this information to patients, is my point. Certainly, looking at CPAP information, pain responsive data for, the spinal cord stimulation market in particular. Like, what does the data even mean? And how do we make that reactable? Can we pick up our phone and go, make this less painful, or stimulate, or put me in a certain brain state, for instance? We're in an interesting time, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing that right now evolving around us right now with
Yeah.
the various ed bands, the various treatments. So taking Tivik and the Tivik story just a little bit further, we started when I started Tivik, non-invasive was pseudoscience, right? I mean, the deep core neurologist didn't think there was anything to the non-invasive. You had to go into the brainstem in order to do anything. We know that's not true now. So 2020. We were struggling a bit with the first product, trying to find the ways that we could get more, extract cash from that. But we also, I also had some access to work that had been done in clinics, producing very reliable results. And so we did some in-house experimentation with it, validated it, and took it to the Feinstein Institute for vagus nerve stimulation. If I have one heartbreaking piece of the Tivik story, it's that right now is locked up and probably not going to be pursued. We saw profound results in being able to do a cervical stimulation. Secret sauce that I can't give away, but some secret sauce behind it that gave us 2x within 20 minutes of treatment, gave us a 2x increase in heart rate variability. It changed the brainwave activities, took people further out of the states that are associated with epilepsy, took them into calm in the gamma areas. So it was, I mean, we got some pretty exciting data coming off of that I was hoping and planning to be able to take into a product that was much more of a, much more focused on a kind of could ride the wave around set point, something like set point, but be offering a non-invasive version, something like microtransponder of that sort.
Yeah, I mean, the vagus nerve is really the mystery nerve, isn't it? It does a bit of everything. I wrote an article about it recently of just how, we have the implantable space, obviously set point, but prior to that, I think LivaNova was the leaders in the space for epilepsy, but then also depression as well, and then rheumatoid arthritis, and then we see anxiety as well. And I mean, there's probably too many to list, really, but there's a ton of different vagus nerve stimulation devices out there. I spoke to somebody today actually that focused on the sleep space using vagus nerve and pain as well, as a company in Europe focusing on vagus nerve stimulation with pain. It's amazing. So it sounds like you guys were quite ahead of the curve for the non-invasive VNS market, because now it's been an eruption, I thought, the last couple of years as really
right. So one of the points we had to look at, though, because now remember I'm a public company, so we had to actually look at it. How long is it going to take to get it to market? What's the funding environment going to be like for this particular type of asset? So I think I said earlier, I was kind of constantly looking at companies to figure out how can I round out this portfolio, the vagus nerve work. This is actually neuroimmunology. It is actually an immunomodulating function, we believe. So now the company has built up a base in the neuroimmunology space. I came across a drug that actually is a immune modulating drug, a phase 3 drug, and we had the opportunity to bring it into Tivik. So thinking about the question of, what's in the best interest of shareholders, a very new speculative, not vagus nerve stimulation device, probably better suited for a startup, public company, a phase 3 drug that's got a BARDA contract, that has line of sight to getting into the national stockpile. We had to make the decision to bring the drug in. And so that's what the last stage was, turning the company, taking the public vehicle it's in, the public vehicle, and turning it into a biopharmaceutical asset, biopharmaceutical. That means spending a year as, you can't make this stuff up. I literally woke up one morning after we completed the licensing transaction and said, I'm now the CEO of a phase 3 biopharma company. This is like, how the heck did that happen?
It's wild.
How could we have predicted that? How could we have predicted that, 10 years ago, that this is where we would take it? It's a great drug. I mean, I'm really excited about the drug we got in. It's got some extraordinary application opportunities in oncology. And potentially, and this is all public disclosure, the discussions are underway with BARDA. That's discussions now underway with Ukraine. So they just announced, made public the discussions with the Ukraine for treatment of radiation effects. So acute radiation syndrome, when it's associated with like a national disaster, a nuclear plant leakage, but also then looking to take it as a competitor to the GCSF drugs, with a very robust mechanism that offers a number of benefits around preserving the GI lining and preserving the progenitor cells for white blood cells. Hopefully being able to give people a much better experience as they go through cancer treatments.
I mean, it's quite the pivot from where you were originally when you were originally launching it. But it sounds like a really sort of admirable direction to be going into. And as you said, for the shareholders, it's pretty a smart move as well. How do you feel about it all, having gone through everything you've done and where you are now? Because your current status with Tivik is what?
They call on me if they need something.
You've seen it all, so yeah.
Yeah. Well, every so often it's like, where do we find the key for X? And I mean, literally the key. How do I get into this file cabinet? No, I mean, I'm in communication. We're talking about some of the opportunities that could come out of the Vegas work, but also at the moment, I mean, 10 years is a long time. So if anybody is thinking about, I'm going to build a company and flip it, plan to take at least a few months off afterwards.
I bet. I mean, yeah, it's quite the journey. I want to say it's like an uncommon, quite a rare journey, but I imagine a lot of people have probably experienced little bits of what you have over the years. It's not easy to raise money. Supply chain probably is still quite a big issue for a lot of people. I think tariffs have shifted a lot of companies' focuses, I think, from outside of a core US commercial launch to other parts of the world now, and fundraising has become a lot more international too.
Right.
So it's a different world, but I think it's very admirable that the pivot and the change you guys have made into the biotech space, and you've got that, another notch on the belt there as well. Of like, I was the CEO of a biotech company for a few months.
For about a year. For about a year.
There you go.
Well, and but it was a natural time to hand over the reins. So we handed over the reins to somebody who's done 17 drugs.
Perfect.
Has built biopharmaceutical plants and has launched multiple product categories. So yeah, it's the right time. What's really interesting to me right now, though, is thinking about what it would mean to build a company today in an AI native place. I mean, think about all the things that all we're talking about the decoding of the signals or how long and hard it is to find connections between research papers when you're sitting there with a stack of research papers reading them and just trying to keep your, two or three scientists trying to keep up on the state of the art
Mm,
versus what it means now to have every single piece of a company be able to build AI native. I mean, it could make a company that can operate so fast in so many dimensions. I think it's a really interesting time to be thinking about it.
yeah, I mean, from a as a recruiter's perspective and from a headcount perspective, I often think about this too, because we hear all doom and gloom stories about company sizes and jobs being replaced by AI. But I imagine that would be a huge impact for companies. I mean, from a cost saving perspective, we're not talking about companies letting go of people. We're talking about growing a company from scratch, and what you can do with less headcount, less expenditure is infinitely more.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, I was talking with a CEO recently he came into a position not realizing how heavy the cash burn was. And he's had to become an AI expert and force it through his company in order to turn down the cash burn and be able to get a long enough runway to be able to do the capital raise. Great company. What your tools are that are available to you. Um, and I
That's
also
it.
think it's going to matter a lot. I think it's going to matter even more in the neuromodulation space. Years and years ago, when I was at Park, somebody somebody made the observation. Is a couple of visionaries there made the observation that uh, the computing revolution and what they were seeing as coming as an AI revolution was still likely to be a footnote in what would happen in the biologics revolution. And we've seen that now with drug discovery. We've seen that how that's moved the engine there. I think we're going to see it in this bioelectronic space um, because we're talking now about mining the electrical signals of the body and
Mhm.
being able to really characterize and understand exactly. And for me, one of the more exciting things is the peripheral nerves. So yes, the vagus nerve is incredibly important, and there's a lot of work to be done on that. But I hate for us to miss the lesson from computing, which is that distributed networks are more efficient. And client server architecture is not always the best way to do things. Edge node computing is usually the best. And our body has a lot of those built in edge node computing around the peripheral nerves and the systems that manage the signals to the brain. So if I were to look 10 years forward from today and say, what will I be talking about then that people thought was crazy today? I think it's going to be in this area of peripheral nerve stimulation and non-invasive.
Mm. Yeah, we hear a lot about peripheral nerve stimulation in the pain management space. I
Mhm.
think there's been a number of companies, and I think at Boston Scientific have acquired a couple. Have been buying everyone, haven't they? But I think there's a company called Ovation Medical in the tibial nerve stimulation space that's closed. There's closed a Series D, and that's really exciting to see as well. That's a wearable device. There's a couple of implantable devices in that space, and I
Right.
think we're going to see more and more of that as we start to understand more about what these nerves do, how we can actually decode the signals and the data that we're generating from them while
Right.
stimulating them at the same time. And I think often we think about like decoding this information as a brain computer interface type device, right? Like trying to understand the brain. We have all this information, we have all these EEG recordings. How do we make sense of the noise? But I think there's, like you said, there's so much more of the body that we should be recording and using AI and ML to help make sense of it all and understand the body more. I think we're
Yeah.
just scratching the surface really with this wearable space. Yeah, and the more access the general public get to it, the more data will accumulate.
Right.
And the more we'll start to see it doesn't always have to be focused on specific indications. I think there's this huge opportunity in the market for cognitive enhancement, seeing companies like Sharper Sense and so forth focusing
Yeah.
on that. And that's going to be a really, really interesting space. Once that'll probably be I think the breakthrough into the general public, the commercial market, when someone can prove safely and discreetly that you can cognitively enhance performance through a wearable device, whether it's a tibial stimulator, whether it's a patch you wear on your head, like some of these EEG companies are developing. But yeah, there's a lot to happen. I think I feel like 2026 does already. Like there's lots of conversations about brain data that we're probably going to see more and more of as technology is kind of enhancing exponentially at the moment. Our ability to make sense of data is improving dramatically all the time. So it's a very exciting time. I mean, I would love to get your thoughts on where you think the neurotech market is going. You've seen it. You've got one in your hand. The PNS space, the peripheral nerve space is fascinating. What do you think the future holds?
I mean, we're going to see device interventions interlinked with. I think we will see devices as well characterized as the pharmaceutical and molecular interactions are. And then the point is going to be linking the two, because that is really what happens in our body. Is it's not just because signals are getting passed between nerves or getting sent up and down, but those are regulating chemical pathways in the body. The body is an electrochemical system. So you've got a $1 trillion industry built around the chemistry. I believe there's a $1 trillion industry that will be built around the electrical side. And then the big question will be how we marry those two up to solve, fundamental, really, really fundamental health issues that plague us all as our systems age and as our, from very early days. We know some of these things start to malfunction even in childhood. So learning more about how to predictively, I would say it's a 50-year vision, but it's probably only a 20-year vision in the world we're in today, as fast as things are moving.
Yeah.
It is a very true statement that the pace of change is ever accelerating. And so, being able to link those things up and being able to find efficient interfaces that, and God knows how the regulatory system and the payer system are going to keep up, because that's going to continue to be the logjam foundation.
Yeah, I think we're in an interesting time when it comes to brain-computer interfaces, as we've got, regulators joining some of the big BCI companies. I think there's going to be a big shift, I think, around how we understand, I wouldn't say brain chips, and it's a horrible word that no one in DCIs likes to use, but I think it's like the reality is the future of it to some degree. So yeah, the regulatory, the reimbursement, the access, patient access base, and then when it bleeds into everyday consumer stuff, that's when it gets really, really interesting.
Well, the other place it's probably going to read into, and I'm just thinking about this as we're talking, is there's been all these advances also made. The stuff that's happening around digital twins. That digital twin model has to include the neural networks, the neural connectivity, the electrical signals that are firing and triggering off chemical transactions. So there's the digital twins world that the FDA is wrestling with. There's all of the organ on a chip stuff that has come up over, that is very robust at this point in time, and how those interface, how we take the data that we learn about the body and then connect it to a framework that allows regulators to be able to take surrogate data. So there is opportunity, I think, in here to accelerate clinical trials, to get more meaningful discovery cycles across the board. There's going to be some innovation that's going to happen in those spaces too.
Yeah, indeed. Well, thank you very much, Jennifer. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
Great to hear that story. Obviously, I think there's probably a lot for people to learn from that, but really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
This podcast is brought to you by Carter Sciences, the headhunting practice that covers not only headhunting, but also fractional talent work for startups who need help, but don't want to spend those big recruitment fees, wanting to work on a more hourly basis with companies, and also career coaching for neurotech professionals. The goal is to provide cost-effective solutions across all neurotech hiring needs.